To all of you, welcome. And it's nice to see so many people joining. My name is Rob Kahn, and I'm from CPI. And this webinar is to go over the lab's 2021 call for ideas. We will be doing about a half-hour presentation and then have at least 20 minutes for Q&A. Because we will have over 100 people on this call, we ask that everyone please keep yourself on mute. You can pose questions into the chat at any time, and we will be logging all those questions, and we'll turn to them during the Q&A session after the presentation. And of course, we're also available after this presentation to answer questions for you, and this will be recorded for people who want to reference this later. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Ben Brochet from the lab.
Thanks, Rob. My name is Ben Brochet, and I'm the program manager for the lab. Thanks again to everyone for joining us today. For those of you who aren't familiar with Climate Policy Initiative, or CPI, the lab's one of our programs, and CPI serves as the secretariat for the lab. Our mission is to help governments, businesses, and financial institutions drive growth while addressing climate change. CPI is a global institution with offices in Brazil, India, Indonesia, Kenya, the UK, and the US. Today, just going to the agenda, we'll cover an introduction to the lab, an overview of our process, what we're looking for in submissions, and then 3 brief case studies on lab instruments to provide examples of how the lab helps develop climate finance ideas accepted into the program. These will be presented by my colleagues. As mentioned during the presentation, you're welcome to submit questions at any point by typing them into the chat, and we'll address them at the end of the webinar during the Q&A session. We're also more than happy to answer questions via email after the event. I know we have limited time on this webinar, so if anything does come up, we're here and available. So just a bit of context at the beginning, as we close out 2020, which surely has been a unique and quite challenging year for everyone. It remains clearer than ever that we must work collectively to address climate change, which is really a crisis of global magnitude that's facing us all. Scaling up all types of investment, especially from the private sector, will be a crucial element in this transition. One of the other projects that CPI is known for is its analysis of annual climate finance flows. According to this, the annual average invested in climate change mitigation and adaptation measures hovers right around $500 billion US. This is the highest that it's ever been, but far short of the trillions needed to address climate change. While we don't know what that total number is, as one reference point, the IPCC estimates that somewhere between 1.6 and 3.8 trillion dollars in annual investment is required just in supply side energy systems alone to keep warming within a 1.5 degree scenario. So it's very clear that we need to move from billions to trillions rapidly, and the majority of that funding will need to come from the private sector. There's several barriers that stand in the way of scaling up investments in climate, including an inadequate access to or a high cost of capital, policy gaps and knowledge gaps, and a really key factor here is investor risk, whether that's real or perceived, which is particularly true in the context of developing and emerging economies. So how does the lab aim to tackle this challenge? The lab was launched in 2014 to play a key role in bridging this investment gap. We do this by identifying, developing, and launching sustainable finance solutions that have the potential to drive billions of dollars in private sector investment into low carbon climate resilient projects in developing countries around the world. The lab tends to focus on earlier stage ideas that have the potential to scale significantly. Many, but not all, ideas employ what we call a blended finance approach. So leveraging public or concessional finance that's delivered at lower than market terms effectively in order to de-risk the earlier stages of development and implementation. We'll give 3 concrete examples of this later in the webinar, but previous types of instruments, just to kind of answer the common question of what is a lab instrument. These have included funds, bonds, structured equity vehicles, insurance products, guarantees, lending platforms, and in certain cases, pay-per-service models, and securitization structures, among others. It's a pretty broad array of financial solutions in our portfolio. So just going to who the lab is, one of the key elements that really sets this program apart and makes it successful is that we're quite fortunate to have a diverse and broad network of partners that include investors and sustainable finance experts from governments around the world, financial services firms, development banks, philanthropies, and other corporate partners. Our members are really actively engaged and involved throughout this process in identifying and developing ideas, and in many cases, investing directly in them as well. Our theory of change revolves around 3 key pillars: the importance of collaboration between the public and private sectors. We openly source concepts for transformative financial instruments from innovators around the world, as you know, and a powerful network of financiers and policymakers to move solutions selected by and developed through the lab into action quickly. And finally, just to go over our process. The lab is an annual process that has 5 distinct stages. Firstly, this open call for innovative investment solutions, which typically brings in hundreds of ideas from a diverse group of global climate entrepreneurs and innovators, which surely are many of you on the line right now. These innovators, we call them proponents in the lab, have included really passionate people from startups, fund and asset managers, representatives from development banks, academia, NGOs, and other large institutions from the public and private sectors. The lab's call for ideas is really open to all. The second step is selection. So once the call for ideas concludes, we screen submissions against an established set of criteria to determine eligibility. Then our global network of members, which you saw on the previous slide, work to select a small number of the most promising and potentially transformative ideas. Once selected, we then move into development. Proponents work with the lab for several months to research and develop their concept into an actionable, bankable financial solution. This is usually through a working group that's comprised of somewhere between 12 and 20 institutions from the lab membership and other experts that we bring together alongside 2 basically full-time analysts from the CPI team. Once the development phase is concluded, lab members vote to endorse the final instruments, signaling their readiness for launch and full support. And finally, implementation. Once endorsed by the lab members, we support moving the concepts into action. In this phase, CPI provides an additional year of targeted support to help ensure endorsed instruments get off the ground, which we'll talk a bit more about in concrete detail in the case studies. So now I just want to go over a couple slides to highlight some of the lab's impacts to date and also reasons to apply. So over the past 6 years, the lab's launched 49 ideas to address investment barriers in a range of sectors and regions. As you can see on this slide, lab instruments are fairly evenly distributed across geographies and sectors. Thus far, lab instruments have mobilized more than $2.3 billion towards climate action, including more than $370 million invested by the lab member institutions themselves, catalyzing this remaining $1.9 billion in additional investment, either in co-investment or at the project level. So that's our introduction to the lab. Now that we understand the basic lab premise and structure, just want to go into this year's call for ideas a bit more, explain what we're looking for and what the process looks like. So idea submissions are assessed in the screening phase against 4 criteria, which are available on our website and on the submission form. First is actionability. So actionability is really the idea's ability to identify how it can be implemented and a clear pathway to doing so, including a defined time frame, key activities and project milestones. Quality ideas should also identify potential challenges and strategies for mitigating them. And this is an opportunity for each proponent team to really highlight their own capabilities, their expertise, their track record, the partnerships that they hold, and their capacity for this process, which can be a quite intensive ask. So it's very important to really highlight who the team is and how we would be working with them and what their past and track record and experience are here, since that's a really crucial element in this process. Next is innovation. Quality applications should demonstrate how they address barriers to climate finance that have either not yet been addressed or will be addressed more effectively than existing approaches in the market. Third is catalytic potential. We're looking for clear potential to mobilize private sources of climate finance within a large market, as well as potential for scale up and replication. This is also the opportunity to highlight your clearly measurable socioeconomic development and climate impacts. This is something that we really look at as well. So the ability to mobilize finance, but also to make a clear environmental and social impact. Last but not least is financial sustainability. Lab ideas should have a clear strategy for phasing out public or philanthropic financial support over time. The vast majority of them will require this at the beginning. That's completely fine, but there needs to be a pathway to achieving market viability on commercial terms in a given time frame. So just going on to the thematic targets for this year. Overall, the lab looks for innovative and catalytic ideas that can accelerate climate-related investment in mitigation, which is reducing greenhouse gas emissions and or adaptation, adapting to and building resilience to the effects of climate change. The lab typically doesn't focus on new technologies as our expertise and network are most suited to the innovative finance space. As long as it's a climate finance instrument, in other words, something that mobilizes investment and will be implemented in developing or emerging economies, we'll consider it. We do have a number of specialty areas that are presented each year. So this year we have 3 sectoral focus areas and 2 geographies where we have dedicated regional panels. First is sustainable cities, ideas in urbanization across buildings, transit, and energy systems, along with other city relevant sectors like water, waste, and sanitation. Sustainable energy access as well, where we're looking for ideas that increase access to renewable energy for economically productive use. This year, we're introducing a new specialty theme, actually around food systems. We're looking for ideas that improve the sustainability and resilience of food systems across the value chain, from growing to processing and distribution across kind of a wide array of sectors that are defined more on the Call for Ideas page. We also have capacity for ideas that focus on issues specific to Brazil and Southern Africa in the sectoral themes just mentioned, or other climate relevant areas. Strong ideas that are lying outside of these 5 priority areas will also be considered. And we have some dedicated slots for these. So please do apply even if your proposal doesn't clearly fit within these specialty areas. So just to quickly touch on the lab's green recovery focus this year. So the pandemic and the economic crisis, I'm sure this is familiar to all of you, have really highlighted the economic fragilities in the world and the importance of building more resilient global systems. A green economic recovery, so one that is socially just and environmentally sustainable, addressing people's needs for decent work, health, and the planet's need for protection, of course, is crucial in ensuring a sustainable and prosperous future. The lab has a key kind of niche role to play here, really deploying solutions that can support green recovery efforts in developing countries around the world. We're encouraging proponents to highlight how their idea supports green job creation, and also encouraging them to note how your idea aligns with public sector green recovery priorities or existing investments, or the idea's potential to create inclusive economic growth and address poverty alleviation or income disparities. Obviously, not every idea will tick all of these boxes, but we really request that you consider this framing when you submit your idea. So in sum, why should you submit? If your idea is selected, your team will receive intensive in-kind analytical, networking, and communication support valued at approximately $250,000. Selected instruments will also benefit from expert guidance from leaders in climate finance drawn from the lab membership across the public and private sectors, as well as CPI's broader network of experts. This support in the form of technical guidance, political capital, and potentially also financial capital can be extremely valuable in getting instruments off the ground. So just to sum up, what happens if your idea is selected? Once the ideas are selected, they go through the development phase from February to September, which we detailed before, refining instrument mechanics, developing financial models and impact assessments, identifying risks, and developing an implementation plan. In September, lab members will convene and vote on whether to formally endorse each instrument, a process in which CPI's communications team helps develop core promotional and analytical materials, and where proponents have the chance to pitch to potential investors and donors. We had over 100 investors and stakeholders on this year's demo day, where all the proponents had the chance to pitch and virtually network with investors and experts. In the past, this has been in person, and depending on how things go public health wise, we would hope to do this in person again this year, but have adapted a pretty strong virtual networking and pitch opportunities as well this year. After endorsement, proponents shift to implementation, receiving lighter touch CPI analytical support on one or two further deliverables, as well as communications, pitch, and investor mapping support, and in certain cases, proposal support for an additional 1 year. Networking and publicity support, delivered through speaking slots, et cetera, are offered to lab alumni on an ongoing basis. So once you're accepted into the program, we're here to support. So that is our process and the broad introduction to the lab. There's a lot more information on our website, including detailed guidelines and an FAQ that I believe Rob shared with all of you before, and maybe posting those links in the chat now as well. I'll turn it over at this point to 3 of our CPI analysts based in 3 of our offices around the world, to go over specific case studies of ideas that they have helped to develop. First up is Morgan Richmond from our US office. Morgan, over to you.
Great, thanks, Ben. Am I audible? Seeing a nod.
You are.
Great. Cooling as a service is an idea from proponents of Basel Agency for Sustainable Energy and the Kigali Cooling Efficiency Program, and it went through the lab process in the 5th annual cycle of the lab in 2019. Cooling as a service is a pay-per-service model, and maybe to the next slide if possible, but aims to decrease energy consumption and GHG emissions from cooling in cities by increasing the accessibility of energy-efficient, low HFC cooling technology. The pay-per-service element of cooling as a service eliminates the upfront investment usually required for clean cooling technology, strengthens incentives for efficient consumption, and also increases opportunities for climate adaptation, health sector resilience, and food waste prevention, especially when applied to vaccine or food cold storage. To support development of the cooling as a service model from its selection in February 2019 for the lab to endorsement of the idea in September 2019, lab support activities included financial model development and analysis of varied financing and cost scenarios, interviews conducted with cooling and financial structuring experts, target market analysis and mapping to assess optimal geographies for the model, and engagement with a lab member working group, as Ben mentioned, that provided ongoing feedback as the analysis developed. During the lab process, we worked with the proponents to develop an implementation pathway shown on the next slide to map out the stages of cooling as a service from preparation to financing, transaction, operation of equipment, and end of contract. Following endorsement by the lab in September 2019, the proponents of cooling as a service base, Basel Agency for Sustainable Energy, launched a CAS initiative that aims to increase adoption of the CAS model by spreading the word about the model, building capacity externally, and supporting implementation of the model in different sectors and regions. The proponents also announced the winners of the first CAS incubator in March 2020, and have been supporting efforts through that incubator to pilot CAS in Argentina, India, Grenada, Costa Rica, and Nigeria through the incubator program. One final note on CAS is that unlike many of the other instruments that have been endorsed by the lab, the proponents of CAS are not seeking to implement the instrument themselves, but instead are working to increase adoption of the model by technology providers, cooling customers, and financiers globally. So that's one example, and now I'll hand it over to Divjot Singh from our India office.
Thanks, Morgan. I hope everyone can hear me. So I'll be presenting the financing for low carbon auto rickshaw. And this was an idea submitted in the India lab in the 2017-18 cycle. The proponent is a Bangalore-based company called Three Wheels United. So the idea is a financing facility that provides credit to electric auto rickshaw drivers so that they're able to purchase electric auto rickshaws. Electric auto rickshaws, or tuk-tuks as they are known in some parts of the world. So in the current scenario, auto rickshaw drivers are in most cases unable to acquire financing from banks since they do not have access to finance. They lack credit history or even the resources to provide collateral. So thus they have no other option but to rent out these auto rickshaws and are trapped in a situation of continual rental payback. So this instrument aims to address this barrier. And in addition, this idea, besides promoting electric mobility, also helps to uplift the auto rickshaw drivers through asset ownership. So the company, Three Wheels United, had initially facilitated financing through off-book lending. That is, commercial banks would lend out to the drivers and they would be the middlemen identifying the rickshaw drivers and performing the requisite due diligence. With time, however, they realized that in order to scale up, they need to set up their own financing facility, since the banks are usually very conservative in their lending practices, and conforming to each bank's process slows down the scale-up process. So this is when they had decided to apply for the lab and got selected as one of the ideas. So through the lab, the Secretariat had assisted the proponent in defining the legal structure of the financing facility, fine-tuning the capital structure, preparation of investment memorandum, connecting with potential investors, and facilitating discussions with app-based mobility companies such as Uber to explore possible partnerships. Next slide, please. Yeah. So in terms of how the idea has progressed over time, the company was able to set up and register its own financing company, an NBFC, or a non-bank financing company. That's the legal entity in India. So they were able to set this up in 2019 and has started lending out. In 2019 itself, they were able to raise $1.7 million in a combination of equity and junior debt, which has helped finance more than 3,000 auto rickshaws with a default rate of less than 1%. So now there is enough evidence of demonstration. Recently, the company has raised another $750,000 and is now in the process of raising another $8 million for deployment of 10,000 electric auto rickshaws. So that's it from my side. I'll hand it over to my colleague, Helen, from our UK office.
Thank you, Divjot. So I'm going to present a case study on the Subnational Climate Finance Initiative. This is an idea proposed to the lab by our 20 Regions for Climate Action, but is executed by a consortium of organizations. So in addition to our 20, they include Pegasus Capital Advisors, an asset manager, IUCN, Gold Standard, and BNP Paribas. The idea went through the most recent lab process. So going over to the next slide. So the SNCF consists of a blended finance fund combined with technical assistance facility that its investments on mid-sized private investors to invest in cities and regions in emerging markets. So it consists of a $750 million blended finance fund that de-risks projects through a $150 million concessional equity tranche combined with a grant-funded technical assistance facility. So that technical assistance facility develops a pipeline, certifies the impact of sustainable infrastructure projects, and provide capacity building to local governments. Furthermore, every $1 of the fund's concessional tranche can mobilize up to $4 in private finance at fund level and up to $24 in private finance at project level. SNCF all quantified by an initial impact modeling exercise. Then to support development of SNCF, from selection to endorsement of the idea, the lab support activities included target market and barriers analysis, the mapping and assessment of comparable instruments, stress testing of the fund level model, and engagements with a lab member working group that provided ongoing feedback as the analysis developed. So on the next slide, I'll quickly touch upon the fund's implementation plan. The consortium recently secured a $18.5 million grant from the GCF, as well as the concessional equity tranche for the blended finance fund of $150 million at the board meeting of the GCF. And the consortium identified a clear pathway to implementation for the next 12 years. The key next steps include hiring staff to manage the day-to-day activities of the fund and the TA.
Sorry, Elaine, I think your audio is broken up. It was cutting out a bit.
Oh, yeah, I think
maybe you can try turning off your video.
I'm not sure if you can hear me. Yeah, that's perhaps
yeah, we can hear you.
Well, I was almost at the end. Okay, perfect. I was almost at the end of my case study anyway, but so for the implementation plan of the organization, the next steps are commencing fundraising for the commercial tranche, securing grants to fully fund the TA facility, and develop TA criteria and safeguards prior to implementation. So the TA facility will last for 7 years, over which it will prepare projects and includes conducting feasibility studies and developing key contracts alongside its capacity building and SDG impact certification activities. And then the fund will last 12 years with 3 times a 1-year extension period and foresees its first close in Q1 2021. I mean, I hope you heard most of this case study, but we'll now be handing over back to Ben.
Great, thanks so much, Elaine. So just to reiterate, the deadline for submissions is 5:00 p.m. US Pacific time on December 22nd, and finalists will be notified of their status in February. At this point, we'll take your questions. So we've had a bunch of questions come in already, which is great. If you haven't had the chance to ask it, please type it into the chat box now. We will just take a bit of a pause at this point just to gather the questions, and we'll begin answering those shortly. So just give us 4 minutes or so, and then we'll dig into the. Okay, great. Well, we have a few that have come in. We're just trying to kind of group these and answer similar questions in one. So there was a question around, which is a good one, around prioritization of instruments. So will the lab prioritize ideas in Brazil or Southern Africa versus, say, Chile? So the way this works is we have dedicated slots with separate funding partners for the Brazil and Southern Africa programs. So ideas for other markets will be considered under our 3 sectoral streams. So that's cities, food systems, and energy access, as well as under some dedicated slots that we have for ideas that don't fit into any of our previously defined themes and regions. So absolutely, those can be considered. They won't necessarily be prioritized. In fact, they won't be prioritized within those separate windows. So it's just simply that we have kind of a dedicated program over here, which all of the Brazil-based instruments and all of the Southern Africa instruments will go into at the submission stage and will be considered under those windows. So hopefully that makes sense. We had some questions about just proponent team structure. So newly formed entities with innovative ideas, but no track records, as well as individuals versus institutions. Newly formed entities are absolutely encouraged to apply. Of course, the team backgrounds and capabilities will be considered, but when you look through the portfolio of 49 ideas on our website, you can see that there's a huge number of those quite successful ones that have come from, in certain cases, 2-person startups or small boutique funds that are managed by 1 or 2 people and have a very lean operations in developing countries. Others that in the agriculture and forestry space that are small startups that have been working on the ground in many cases in communities. So yeah, absolutely encourage proponents of those types to apply. And in many cases, the small to mid-sized proponents, the ask and the need for the type of support that the lab can provide is even more clear. And therefore, there's I think a better case to be made for entry into the program. So this question also of how developed the proposal needs to be in order to be considered. So the lab has accepted ideas from very early concept stage all the way through to pilot stage. So it really depends. I think the key thing is ensuring that there's kind of enough of a structure for both CPI and for the members to assess this as a financial vehicle. So you should think through the structuring, the potential funding partners, the implementation pathway as much as possible. But if something is completely developed and already launched, there may be less of an argument for how the lab in terms of technical assistance can really add value. So there's kind of a sweet spot in the middle, I would say, in the kind of late stage concept to maybe an early initial pilot. Many of our successful ideas will have had initial conversations with investors to kind of sound things out, but the majority of them haven't gotten to the place of securing anchor funding yet. But yeah, again, that has varied quite a bit over time. Are funds available to support proponents during the development phase? Unfortunately, the lab does not currently offer funding support during the lab process. There's really significant benefits for proponents in terms of TA, technical assistance, and access to the network. And in many cases, this has led to funding support from the lab members. This is not a guaranteed part of the program. What you get when you win is really access to that network, and then the 250,000 in technical support. And you're basically an opportunity to build something that is a concept into a bankable instrument. And in many cases, this has led to significant funding support, either right out of the gate at endorsement or during the continued support process. But unfortunately, there are no funds available to support proponents during the development phase. In the event that you're accepted into the program, I mean, I know there are other prizes that offer small working capital amounts that many of our lab members have received through other programs in the broader lab network, either at endorsement or in some cases while they're going through the actual process. Just a quick, question on geography. Definition of Southern Africa. So this is the Sadc region, the SADC region. Uganda is, I believe, considered East Africa, but we have had successful lab ideas that have pilot operations or have an implementation pathway in Uganda. And again, these, they don't have to fit under the windows that we've defined regionally. They'll be considered under separate ones. So yeah, just looking at some of the other ones. Maybe I'll just take a quick break and try to pass a couple of the other questions that have come over to my colleagues. Also because we're continuing to get other questions in the chat.
So I can answer a couple of questions. So there's this question that do all the ideas selected in phase 2 end up being the ideas that are implemented? So yes, if the ideas are endorsed by lab members, then these are the ideas that are implemented. Note that the implementation usually takes place after the lab cycle ends, once the instruments have been endorsed.
Thanks, Devjot.
There's another question. That is that does the lab support or fund initiatives that are similar to past projects or funded instruments? So yes, if they are, if these ideas are in a new geography, otherwise no, since the idea does not meet the innovation criterion of the lab.
Then there is another question related to if you already have a product developed that's been piloted and is closely related to what the lab criteria are. Is there any other way to join the lab if that is already developed? So the short answer to this for and could you become members? So for membership, that is considered by the steering group, but there are many opportunities to join the working groups that myself and my colleagues have discussed over the development of the lab ideas. So if you'd like to be in touch for that, I think you can always reach out.
Thanks, Elaine.
Go ahead, Ben.
Sorry, Rob. Oh yeah, I was just going to respond to another question about this is a really good one. Contributed a well-received proposal 2 years ago and was encouraged to retool Henry submits. One of the main comments was to improve the business case of the venture. What formats or structures would you recommend in a comprehensive business case? Are business canvas plans acceptable? Yes, business canvas plans are definitely acceptable. Again, I mean, our form is relatively fixed. We do encourage the submission of 1 to 2 supplementing materials, no more than 1 or 2 pages in length each. So these could be a more structured business plan in certain cases, an implementation pathway, or a graphic showing the structure of the fund. On the whole, there's no like direct answer to this really without seeing what the proposal actually was. I would say that many of the ideas that have been successful in the lab have submitted multiple times and have received kind of iterative feedback from the Secretariat and members to help improve those over time. I would just say, be clear, be consistent. We've tried to make the form as helpful as possible and also tilted towards brevity. So, clarify what you've done, just noting the improvements that have been made, and even directly responding to if there were comments made from the Secretariat to you personally about ways that the ideas concept could be improved, and articulating that in the call for ideas form would all help, I think, just to show the evolution of it over time. There's another question on what happens if there's a need to conduct a pilot to validate an existing prototype of or proof of concept of an instrument. So,
and Ben, there's another question related to that
Great.
just came in, and it was,
fantastic.
Would you make sense to submit a proposal that requires the lab to develop the business case? So those are 2 similar questions.
Yes, indeed. So I'll try to speak to that generally. If the idea is really more about a research project to then eventually develop a business case or a financial instrument, the lab is probably not the best fit for that. That's not to say that there isn't research conducted and support provided throughout the process to refine a business case or a business plan. So there should be an initial business case or business plan, but much of the lab's work is actually about refining the financial mechanics, the pathway to market, and really defining and strengthening the business case for a financial instrument. But if the project is more about a pilot or a proof of concept, or trying to sort of explore the potential for a financial instrument, that's typically one step kind of before the lab would work in. On the other hand, I would want to be clear that many of the financial instruments that have been accepted into the lab have been in a pre-pilot stage, and there has been a pilot operations associated with their launch once they get off the ground. So in that case, it would be eligible. Another one, do Southern Africa proposals have to be exclusively for Southern Africa, or could it be an idea with broader geographic scope, including Southern Africa? It could be an idea with broader geographic scope, of course, but within the Southern Africa stream, we're definitely looking for ideas that can make a strong business case, either through their network or the specificity of the proposal, why this would be a good fit for the region. So last year, basically all of the finalists had strong existing networks and very specific local market knowledge in Southern Africa, and had developed a proposal that was kind of clearly associated with the NDC goals and market needs of one or more countries in the Sadc region. So, while it could have geographic scope outside, and we always welcome ideas that can be scaled, we will certainly be looking for ideas with a strong thesis for that region. Is it possible to apply with more than one concept and more than one consortium? Alain, maybe I'll turn this over to you or to Divjot.
Yeah, I think the short answer to that is yes. If you have ideas that apply to multiple of the streams, then you can select them up front, or if you have multiple ideas, one or two, then I think you can also submit them that way. So I think, yeah, the short answer is yes. Yes, indeed. We definitely welcome more than one idea, and many of the successful proponents have included more than one in certain cases. Great. Yeah, just gonna pause for a second to take a couple more. So some questions about reviewing the submission form in advance. So in order to view the submission form, you'll need to sign up for an account on our website. That does not mean you have to submit your idea. You can go in and scroll through the form. You'll just need to tick through the initial questionnaire that basically just goes through some primary questions to ensure it's actually a financial instrument that you're submitting and that you understand what the lab is looking for, and to make sure that you're an appropriate and relevant proponent. And at that point, you can view the form. There was another question that came in about sharing past full applications from proponents that were successful. Unfortunately, we're not able to do that. Sometimes the information that's provided is proprietary, and there's an understanding that that will only be shared with the Secretariat and with the lab membership if successful in getting to the shortlisting phase. So we can't share that, but what we can share are all of the resources that articulate in quite a bit of detail how each of these ideas work. That's available on our website. I think there was maybe Divjot, do you want to speak to that one that came in about emerging tech? I think it'd be good just to kind of highlight maybe also what we said about sort of more research-oriented proposals.
Yeah, sure, Ben. I'll just read out the question. So there's this question which asks that what are the parameters or concerns about initiatives harnessing emerging tech? I think Ben has somewhat answered it, that ideas that are very focused on research or very academic research, I would say, the lab may not be the best fit. The journey from research to markets is a long one, and the lab would be in the second half of that journey, fine-tuning the idea when you have so a picture in your head in terms of what the implementation pathway would look like. So the lab is more about fine-tuning rather than developing the business case. There's another question. Would you favor a rather more narrowly focused concept initially that can be developed and piloted via the lab into something that has high potential to be rolled out at global or regional scale? or always something that is universally scalable from the start. So I think concepts that are narrow are perfectly fine. We would prefer ideas that have a shorter implementation pathway and which can be replicated, even if that replication potential is regional and not universal or global, rather than wait for an idea to develop and show demonstration and which is universally sort of applicable.
Yeah. In terms of the time commitment expected, this is typically 2 days a week is what the average is, but this does depend on the team.
There was another good question about what is the balance between financial instrument and technological solution. So does the lab accept applications that are just purely financial instruments, or are also technological solutions considered?
So yeah, maybe I don't know, Dipjot, if you want to speak to this, that's fine. What I would say is we have had, or maybe even Alen, this might be a good one for you. Just the blockchain crop insurance is actually, I would say, one of the more tech heavy instruments that we've worked with. Again, it needs to kind of be primarily a financial instrument. But we have had some with a strong technology aspect. Ellen, maybe you can iterate on that a bit more.
Yeah, sure. So it definitely has to have a financial component, which in the blockchain climate risk crop insurance instrument was then it being an insurance. And it applies to the adaptation stream. So those are two core criteria. Yet we did implement it on a blockchain, and it was quite technical heavy. But that's, for example, so a crop insurance where you add blockchain for more transparency is an example of an idea that we would accept, as it has this financial component. But if it also has that tech component, we even highly welcome it, as it's quite innovative.
Yeah, I just like to add that it's somewhat difficult to answer because every idea has some level of technology. But in general, if there's a market barrier that's preventing flow of finance, and you have a solution, a technology solution that can help overcome that barrier to finance, and you have a picture of what the implementation pathway would look like, and what the timeline would look like, then we would encourage you to apply to the lab. But if you have an idea that's contingent on you acquiring a patent, then it's the lab is not really in a position to help you acquire that patent. So I hope this was helpful.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Great. Well, I think we've responded to the majority of them. There are a lot of really great questions here, so we've been trying to kind of group them as much as possible and respond to them in bulk. So, that's an interesting question. Is there ever a case that a submitted proposal is submitted and rejected by the lab, but a specific partner sponsor is interested in taking the concept further? Yes, there's been rare cases where that has happened, but because the top ideas are visible to a number of our partners, the finalists in certain cases have been successful. Finalists are those that are actually invited to pitch and submit at the selection meetings. And in certain cases, they have received funding and taken their concept forward through one of the partners in the lab network, even if it hasn't been a perfect fit for the lab this year.
Yeah, but I think, and just to clarify that, so that's sort of the semifinalist stage where things become visible.
Correct.
There's not this idea that you submit an idea and everyone's seeing it and following up separately. That was what one of the people were asking, how confidential is it?
Yes. So there's a pitch element to the selection process. So at this point, you would need to be okay with your idea being visible to the secretariat and also to the lab members. So those, these submissions will be visible to them. Of course, they're not to be shared outside of that, and they're, that's a specific piece of this. And there is a pitch element, but only for the finalists.
So unfortunately, we are running out of time, but we wanted to thank, we still have quite a number of people here. So thank you everyone for attending this entire session. You see on the screen some of the ways to follow up with us. Again, many of these questions are answered on our website on the Call for Ideas landing page. There's a short FAQ and much more detailed guidelines, and I encourage you to seek answers there. But of course, we provided our email here. You are more than welcome to email us, and we will endeavor to answer as many questions as we can. The recording will be available on our website, and we'll post that to social media. So we encourage you to at least follow us on Twitter or LinkedIn if you're interested in staying on top of the lab process. And otherwise, we hope this was helpful to you, and we look forward to receiving everyone's submissions before December 22nd. Thank you all.